Before Freud, mind was supposed to be the source of consciousness, and unconscious mind would have been regarded as an oxymoron. But Freud established that human behavior is guided by factors of which the person concerned himself may not be conscious at all. In an outline of psychoanalysis, Sigmund Freud clearly attributed three qualities to our mind. They are the conscious, the subconscious or preconscious, and the unconscious. Functionally, mind was also categorized into the ego, the ID, and the superego. The ID was initially defined by Freud as a primal portion of the mind containing aggressive urges, sexual cravings, and buried or unconscious memories. This portion of the brain is prominent in newborns because its major trait is impulsiveness. It is also worth noting that the ID is unaffected by logic or reality because it operates in the unconscious region of the mind. The ego, according to Freud, serves as a bridge between the ID's desires and the superego. It is the component of the mind responsible for decision-making, according to Freud. It operates rationally, as opposed to the chaotic and irrational ID. The superego, according to Freud, is the component of the mind which is involved with a moral consciousness. This area of the mind incorporates societal ideals and develops as a kid grows older. As a result, the superego's principal role is to restrain the ID's urges, particularly those that society bans. These three areas of the mind have diverse characteristics, according to Freud, yet they interact to shape people's behavior. The unconscious, being a repository of dark drives, is characterized by its dynamicity and the blindness of its urges against the dull conformity of the conscious. The unconscious, in its urge to make itself explicit, first becomes preconscious, that is, capable of becoming conscious, and finally becomes conscious. These are the memories that have been repressed as a result of trauma, as well as those that have been deliberately forgotten and are no longer meaningful to us, or forcefully repressed because of their morbidity. The unconscious mind is the matrix, on which our conscious activities are being played. Freud believed that the principal driving force behind men's and women's activities was repressed or expressed sexuality. Unfulfilled sexuality led to pathological conditions. Freud's psychoanalytic theory teaches that it is here, in the unconscious mind, that necessary changes can occur through the use of psychoanalysis. Freud's hypothesis earned him the title of the father of psychoanalysis. Sigmund Freud and Carl Gustav Jung, two luminaries of psychoanalysis, met for the first time in Vienna, Austria in 1907. According to reports, the brainstorming session lasted more than 13 hours. 2 years after their first meeting, Freud and Jung toured the United States together, culminating in what the American Psychological Association considers the most renowned conference in the history of American psychology. Despite their mutual attraction, the men's friendship was brief. Growing professional conflicts and scandalous personal interference had split the men by 1913. The professional schism is said to have started when Jung's thesis about the psychology of the unconscious and sexuality diverged from Freud's ideas about psychoanalysis. The first disagreements amongst respected psychoanalysts arose when Jung began work on the psychology of the unconscious. They all had distinct perspectives on the nature of libido and religion. For Freud, personal growth was all about libido. For Jung, sexual development was secondary. Instead, he concentrated on the collective unconscious, the area of the unconscious where he believed memories, ideas, and archetypal pictures were acquired from ancestors. Few persons have had as much impact on contemporary psychology as Carl Jung. Jung is responsible for notions such as extroversion and introversion, archetypes, modern dream interpretation, and the collective unconscious. Jung established psychological terminologies such as archetype, complex, and synchronicity, and it is through his work that the Myers-Briggs Type Indicator, MBTI, a prominent mainstay of personality assessments today, was formed. The ego, according to Jung, was the center of the field of consciousness, the component of the mind that houses our conscious awareness, and our feeling of identity and being. This section functions as a sort of command and control center, coordinating our ideas, feelings, perceptions, and intuition and controlling access to memories. It is the portion that connects the inner and outward worlds, defining how we react to what is outside of us. The origin of the ego lies in the self-archetype, and is just one small portion of the self. Archetypes are inborn universal representations of individuals, actions, and personalities that influence human behavior. According to Carl Jung, these archetypes were archaic forms of fundamental human wisdom passed down from our forefathers. The archetypes depict universal patterns and visions from the collective psyche. Jung felt that we inherited these archetypes in the same way that we inherited instinctual patterns of conduct. The term archetype is not meant to denote an inherited idea, but rather an inherited mode of functioning, corresponding to the inborn way in which the chick emerges from the egg, the bird builds its nest, and eels find their way to the Bermudas, Jung writes. It is, in other words, a pattern of behavior. Jung felt that these blueprints are highly impacted by many archetypes in our lives, such as our parents and other relatives, key events like births and deaths, and archetypes originating in nature and in our civilizations like common symbols and elements like the moon, the sun, water, fire, etc. All of these aspects combine to find expression in the mind, and are commonly represented in our stories and myths. Jung also believed there was an opposing spiritual polarity that had a significant influence on the psyche. The self, according to Jung, was the totality of the mind, with all of its potentials. It is the component of the psyche that seeks fulfillment and wholeness. The self was supposed to drive the process of individuation, or the individual's ambition to realize his or her full potential. Those characteristics that we detest or prefer to ignore combine to produce what Jung referred to as the shadow. This aspect of the psyche, which is also significantly impacted by the collective unconscious, gives rise to psychological complexes and aberrations. Jung did not dismiss the shadow as having no function or virtue. He believed that where there is light, there must also be shadow, which means that the shadow plays a vital part in balancing the whole psyche. Without a well-developed shadow side, a person might quickly become shallow and too concerned with the views of others, a walking persona. Just as conflict is required to advance the storyline of any excellent fiction, light and dark are required for our own growth. The anima and animus are the psyche's contrasexual archetypes, according to Jung, with the anima in a man and the animus in a woman. These are constructed from the individual's feminine and masculine archetypes, as well as experience with members of the opposing sex, starting with a parent and striving to balance out one's otherwise one-sided view of gender. These archetypes, like the shadow, tend to be projected, but in a more idealized form. One seeks for the mirror of one's anima or animus in a possible mate, which accounts for the phenomena of love at first sight. To Jung, individuation was the quest for wholeness that the human psyche always pursues, the trip to become conscious of himself or herself as a unique human being, but unique only in the sense that we all are, not more or less. Freud and Jung differed in their definition of the unconscious. Freud saw the unconscious as a collection of pictures, ideas, and experiences that the person refused to understand, resulting in neuroses. Jung expanded on this idea by claiming that each person held a collective unconscious, a collection of shared images and archetypes shared by all people. These frequently bubbled to the surface of the individual unconscious. Freud felt that repressed or expressed sexuality was the primary motivating factor behind men's and women's actions. Sexual unfulfillment resulted in pathological problems. Jung thought that sex is merely one of many factors that motivate individuals. More fundamentally, people are motivated by the desire to acquire individuation, completeness, or complete self-knowledge. Many emotions cause individuals to behave in psychologically undesirable ways, yet all of these behaviors stem from a need to feel whole. According to Freud, the unconscious was a repository for all repressed sexual drives that manifested in bodily or mental illness. Only through stripping off the unconscious can a person learn to live joyously and recover from mental illness. Jung, on the other hand, felt that the unconscious frequently sought wholeness on its own, and that mental disease was not pathology, but rather an unconscious regulation of emotions and accumulated experience directed towards individuation. The therapist's purpose, according to Jung, was to aid the patient in knowing how to better strive for individuation, which would result in a whole person. Unlike Freud, Jung's approach is more in line with the later humanist psychologists. Freud restricted the unconscious to repressed memories and deeds. Jung acknowledged the reality of the collective unconscious, the source of psychic energy and universal constructs, the archetypes, that transcend specific civilizations. Much of Jung's work focuses on how the collective unconscious manifests itself in art, society, and, in particular, alchemy, which Jung identified as an intricate allegory of psychological metamorphosis. Freud concentrated on the past, whereas Jung concentrated on the person's present and future. Freud considered traumas to be sexual in character, but Jung believed there was more to it. Libido, according to Freud, was a component of the ID and the urge for sexual and unconscious conduct. Jung referred to libido as psychic energy, a universal life force. It is a psychological force that drives personality, and is not sexual in nature. Jung's view of the unconscious was far more complicated and subtle. But the unconscious, according to Freud, is like Pandora's box that people carry about with them, containing everything that is repressed and abominable. The struggle between the EED, the instinctual, superego, the collective and family ideas we introject, and the diplomatic negotiator ego is central to Freud's schema of the human psyche. The ID and superego are always at odds, and it is the ego's task to satisfy the ID's desires as much as possible while remaining within society's constraints. This dynamic heavily influences the role and character of the unconscious. But Jung held that the ego is the light we use to view what is around us. This light is crucial, and it is more than just a mediator between the ID and the superego. The entire aim of being human is to bring up more and more of what is in the unconscious, which is like a dark, bottomless ocean, into the light of awareness. But he did not deny that there are all kinds of critters in that black ocean, like complexes and archetypes. Everything about Freud is based on and interpreted in sexual terms. Do the little girls adore their fathers? Or, the kid boy loves his mommy? That's sexual. Oedipal complex, Freud would conclude. Children acquire powerful romantic desires for their opposite-sex parent at the phallic stage. This urge causes individuals to despise their same-sex parents. Boys want to replace their fathers and own their mothers, whereas girls are envious of their moms and want their fathers. Because they can't do either, they suppress their emotions for fear of repercussions. If the complex is not resolved, it might lead to neurosis later in life. Did you just have a Freudian slip? In the psychopathology of everyday life, Freud states that these slips, or Verliebtungen, as he called them, were an important gateway into the unconscious. He believed that when someone said the word breast instead of best, as Ted Kennedy did on live television, they are really expressing a repressed desire. In this case, obviously, for sex. Still, it is nearly impossible to study psychology without considering the concepts of Freud. Though his theory of psychosexual development, which holds that personality develops through early childhood interactions with oral, anal, and urinary stimuli, has been repeatedly debunked, other Freudian concepts, such as the relationship between the conscious and unconscious mind, continue to influence how we think about ourselves. Whether you adore him or view his writing with skepticism, every professional psychologist owes something to Freud. Carl Jung was not dogmatic. In the amazing mind of this free thinker, the inventor of analytical psychology, there were many other problems that went beyond the theoretical principles that Freud acknowledged. Despite being a trained clinical psychologist with a thorough understanding of its theory, he spent most of his time researching those other areas. According to Jung, humans are born 3 times. The first stage is the actual physical birth. The second is the formation of the ego, and the third is the birth of what Jung refers to as spiritual awareness. This last birth, according to Jung, will never occur if the individual concentrates solely on the ego, its training, and its inflexible, unresponsive mental patterns. Jung studied Christianity, Hinduism, Buddhism, Gnosticism, Taoism, and other traditions in depth since, for him, spiritual life was the essential foundation of psychological existence. One remains grateful to Jung for restoring humanity to us humans, and for ushering in some hope. Hope for evolution. And hope that, maybe, we are not just repressed sexual beasts after all. Sigmund Freud passed away on September 23, 1939. Reportedly his last words were, "Now it's nothing but torture and makes no sense anymore." Carl Jung passed away on June 6, 1961. Jung viewed death as a fulfillment, rather than a negation, of life. In his essay The Stages of Life, he wrote, "As a doctor, I am convinced that it is hygienic, if I may use the word, to discover in death a goal toward which one can strive, and that shrinking away from it is something unhealthy and abnormal which robs the second half of life of its purpose."